So PinkNews
It's not good journalism.
was then cancelled.
It was the most horrendous, problematic people.
And now there's a big scandal around them. It's a rag. The lowest common denominator, terrible journalism, slating and defaming largely women, but also some men, for not towing the line on the LGBTQI2 Spirit Plus community. I think it's now 30 former and current members of staff that have made allegations because they managed to get recordings, secret recordings. And there are plenty of people willing to go on the record to say, yes, that happened to me too. When we were all being defamed, bullied, harassed, targeted, and our lives being made a misery thanks to PinkNews, I doubt if any of those young people gave a damn. I don't think I can take this anymore. And then guess what happened? A fairy godmother appeared in my DMs in the shape of JK Rowling.
Shut up.
And if you want to sue them, I will fund the case.
No.
My person close to PinkNews told me that
The last 2 months, you guys have really listened when I've asked you to subscribe. Thank you so much. Now, the next step is to ask you on YouTube to hit the reminder notification on my homepage. Without that, you'll miss out on my videos, and we wouldn't want that. Make sure as well that notifications are set as on YouTube or it won't work. If you're watching on Spotify, please hit follow. Yeah, okay, I want to ask you about the incredible scandal of PinkNews that hit all the papers at one moment and then very quickly disappeared. But first, can you just sort of explain to those who don't know what PinkNews is, Julie Bindel?
Well, it's a media outlet that is supposedly about queer news and lifestyle and politics. In fact, it's a rag, the lowest common denominator, terrible journalism, which promotes whatever might get the largest number of clicks. So I don't think there's any ideology involved at all as far as the owners are concerned. They are Benjamin Cohen and husband Anthony James. And they both look like a pair of Muppets when you see them at whatever event they're throwing to get politicians in the room, such as fake award ceremonies, giving awards out for not misgendering the rabbit, that kind of thing. And they employ some, mostly young people, to do their reporting, and some of them will have either been good reporters or could potentially be good journalists. But there is absolutely no room to be good journalists at PinkNews because it's obsessed with the most vacuous, meaningless issues. Beyond celebrity gossip, it's Z-list, unknown, celebrity, not interesting gossip. And then the rest of it is slating and defaming largely women, but also some men, for not towing the line on the LGBTQI2 Spirit Plus community.
And typically it would be the TQI double spirit bit.
Which has absolutely no meaning at all and nobody knows who they are.
I've been told we have to be very careful because these two are particularly litigious. Is that right?
Well, they seem to have been sued more than they have threatened to sue. So they're in a bit of a precarious position right now with the allegations that's been made against them. They have, not unexpectedly, come back and said that they are pressing or pushing for criminal charges relating to, I think it's now 30 former and current members of staff that have made allegations against both Cohen and James.
So just to make that clear, or to understand what you're saying, that they want to push criminal charges against the 30 people who are alleging against them.
And the only thing I can think of is that would be harassment. So it would be online harassment, because that falls into the criminal category as opposed to civil law.
Or to scare them off.
Well, of course, and these are the tactics that they use.
Yeah.
So the story that broke, it's been kind of breaking for some time in 2024 largely, with PinkNews whistleblowers, an online presence, had a Twitter account, obviously current and former members of staff at PinkNews because they managed to get recordings, secret recordings of meetings between Ben Cohen, sometimes Ben Cohen and Anthony James, who's the COO, which is Chief Operating Officer, I suppose, and Ben Cohen is the Chief Exec. They were in meetings with various members of staff, sounding like the absolute wazzocks that they are, talking about how they've got to move away from just reporting on trans issues because some of the advertisers are getting nervous.
Really? But that's really interesting.
Yeah, but that was cited as rabid transphobia, and this is where it gets quite funny.
Cited by whom?
By the likes of Diva magazine, run by Linda Riley, who is like a lesbian Rupert Murdoch, and is recognised quite some time ago that there's money to be made with the trans issue, and has turned Diva magazine, that used to be for lesbians, into a LGBTQIA Two-Spirit Plus outfit that lauds and praises and celebrates men that claim to be women and claim to be lesbian. So PinkNews was then cancelled by the likes of Linda Riley, who has, and this is a lovely twist in the story, Andrew, employed Nancy Kelly, who is formerly the chief exec of Stonewall, took over after Ruth Hunt ran the place into the ground by introducing the trans issue, forgetting about lesbians and gays. And Nancy Kelly, unfortunately, probably has fewer brain cells than a plant pot. So she's now been poached by Linda Riley to do something trans-related for Diva magazine or one of their annual events. And both Nancy Kelly and Linda Riley and others were all thinking, great, the competition has been cancelled for transphobia. And the irony being that PinkNews is the very engine that drove Stonewall in the first place to prioritise the trans issue over everything else, over lesbians and gays and bisexuals that it was supposed to represent, because PinkNews had the vast majority of its coverage was in fact trans-related.
My gosh, it's just a whole mad cycle of the woke eating their own.
It is, and none of them it's all about money in my view, and none of it even is about ideology. It may well be for the consumers of this so-called news. It may well be for the young people that work at Diva or at PinkNews, but it certainly isn't for the profiteers in the same way that the porn industry isn't driven by a love of sex, but driven by money. So, this is just completely bonkers that they're all, as you say, eating each other. But PinkNews did at one stage have quite a lot of status. I think 6 former prime ministers have spoken at their award ceremonies or annual bash, or have written for the rag itself. And there's a photograph, for example, of Jeremy Corbyn at one of their events, and Ben Cohen is lauding him, and I think this is where Jeremy Corbyn announced that his pronouns were he, him, because obviously we needed to be told that.
What a plonker.
Quite. So either way, and he was there with Chris Smith, who it's been suggested was the first ever member of parliament to come out as gay or lesbian. He wasn't. There was a lesbian in the 1970s who came out, an MP who was really piled upon for that. But anyway, so that's PinkNews, and now there's a big scandal around them.
It's extraordinary. Do you ever watch First Dates?
I have done.
Because First Dates, they're very on the trans thing. There's always like 7 trans people. But then I think also it's quite hard for the producers. They've got to find enough sort of people who are willing to go out on dates in public. And you're not going to find that many sort of normal people, right? How do you find? So they do tend to either be quite severely on the spectrum or trans or both, But even then, I think, even though I think this is all mad and bonkers, I still quite enjoy the show.
Right.
And one of and the annoying thing is you're supposed to pretend you don't, it's like, oh, this is such and such, this is this bloke so and so. It's like that's not, that's a very short bloke with a very thin frame. That was not a bloke. But okay. And then halfway through the date, they say, I've got something to tell you, to the person who's like this weird guy who's like getting all aroused under the table. And that guy's like, oh, what is it? I don't imagine what it is. It's like, well, I'm actually the trans blah, blah, blah. And then the person goes, oh, I had no idea. Ooh. And they all know. But one of those it was a guy who a girl who became a boy. It was thought they did anyway. Is one of the complainants in the Pink News thing.
Those of us that have been targeted by Pink News, feminist lesbians that have spoken out against gender ideology because of its potential harms to women and girls, we are not surprised at all to see now that there are allegations by members of staff and former members of staff that are misogynistic in their nature. For example, Ben and husband Andrew walking around asking female members of staff, notice they know what a woman is when they're about to ask this question, if they would be their surrogate, because they have now got one child via a surrogate mother, but at that time they were looking for someone to carry their baby. And imagine what that must be like, being a young female employee and being asked and saying no, and how uncomfortable that would make you feel. And then, of course, there are several allegations that either Cohen or James behaved sexually inappropriately at parties where there's lots of heavy drinking. Apparently lots of drink. The drink culture at Pink News has long been known to be quite a vibrant one, led by Cohen and James. So this was obviously, there's enough evidence for several news outlets to publish these allegations, including, surprisingly, The Guardian. But the Evening Standard, the BBC did the very first investigation into this. And there are plenty of people willing to go on the record to say, yes, that happened to me too. And as far as the Pink News whistleblowers go, I don't know where they are now. They've disappeared off Twitter because they were threatened by James and Cohen with some kind of legal action, possibly defamation. But I think I know who they are. And I think I know that one of them was very instrumental in when I took legal action, when I sued Pink News and Ben Cohen for defamation, that one of the Pink News whistleblowers was egging Cohen on when he wanted to drop the case because it was becoming more and more expensive for them.
He was egging him on to...
So one of the Pink News whistleblowers, I believe, this person worked for Ben Cohen at the time, and I had an insider who was giving me bits of information, someone that was close to Pink News but didn't work there. And I believe that one of the whistleblowers that is now very, very angry about Pink News and how they were treated when they worked for Pink News, this person was egging Cohen on to not drop the case. Against
because it wasn't your case, you were suing them.
Was egging Cohen on
to fight you.
To fight and fight and fight till I lost my nerve or lost my house, because defamation is very, very expensive. And it's interesting the way things work out. But wow.
It's very cult memory, isn't it? It's the people, when they're in the cult, they're fighting, and then suddenly they're the ones kicked out now, and they're going, oh gosh, what was I doing?
And they have been, and it takes so little. It takes so little to be all of a sudden the bad transphobe, which Pink News, it's so ironic, because they have been obsessed with this. And it would have appeared at one stage that they were willing, on a matter of principle, to fight valiantly women like me, saying we shouldn't really have men with stiffies in women's toilets.
Yeah, I titled our last video like that, something like that. Did you see?
Right, possibly.
Like he had a stiff, she had a stiffy or something.
Yeah, well, somebody had a stiffy in some toilet. That's usually the case.
You can't be having stiffies in toilets.
No, it's just not on. I don't care who you are.
No. Yeah.
I do. Straight or Australian.
I've always got a horrible joke in my head that do I say it or is that the end of, and I'm sorry you found me in that state, Julie. But Julie didn't find me in that state. But continue, sorry.
So Pink News are now the baddies, even by the rest of the Blue Fringe Brigade.
Yes. And
of course, we're not surprised, those of us that have been targeted by Pink News, JK Rowling included, who had 30-odd, maybe 40-odd articles about her written by Pink News, nasty ones, in 1 week.
Oh, in 1 week?
In 1 week. Joanna Cherry, the former MP, who is an out lesbian and a great campaigner for lesbian rights, had to threaten legal action before I did, I think maybe a year or so before I did, so maybe 2018 or 19, because of things they made up about her that were defamatory. And they did cave in at that stage. But by the time I threatened legal action and then took legal action, they were determined not to ruin their brand by caving into me. And so they fought it and fought it and fought it. And it didn't end well for them. So there you go. But now they're in trouble with these allegations. There are many, many allegations by lots of different individuals, and all of whom signed up to the queer brand. And what's very interesting is that those of us that have been victims of Pink News, we care about the fact that these people were bullied, harassed, or even, as some allegations go, assaulted whilst working at Pink News. We care about them when we were all being defamed, bullied, harassed, targeted, and our lives being made a misery thanks to Pink News. I doubt if any of those young people, or anyone that worked there, gave a damn about the effect it had on us.
No, because they thought you were a Nazi.
They just believed the hype, and in fact they were part of the hype.
Are you able to say what they were saying about you, that you sued for defamation, or is it a Streisand effect kind of thing?
No, of course not, I can't. There was an article that came out in Pink News in May 2020, and I was so used to them writing about me and writing about the most irrelevant detail and building it up into something shock horror, or just saying very nasty, sly things about me when I was assaulted by a man outside Edinburgh University after I'd been speaking there about male violence at an event. A massive bloke, a trans activist, ran after me and would have knocked me flying had it not been for the 4 security guards that held him off. And immediately they were trying to get a comment from me so that I would confirm my allegations that I had been assaulted. I mean, it was the police took action, it was on CCTV, the security guards were there were lots of witnesses, but it was, oh, I see, so you're making another story up about trans people, are you?
Oh, so that was in the article.
Yeah, horrible, horrible things. Then we get to 2020, and a piece came out by a journalist called Vic Parsons, a they, them.
Narcissist.
A female narcissist, who, and the heading was something like, lesbian speaks out about being trafficked, groomed, coerced into the cult of gender critical. I mean, it was a mad headline, but I got 4 calls the day that it came out, 4 messages on WhatsApp. And I had a very early start the next day, so I just ignored the WhatsApp messages and thought, oh, I'll read it tomorrow, because they were all saying, oh dear, there's a really nasty piece about you in Prick News, which is our affectionate term, or Penis News. And it doesn't name you, but it's so obviously about you. It's awful. Thought we'd better let you know. And the next day when I read it, I thought, well, of course that's me. It has to be me. High-profile national journalist who's a lesbian. There isn't anyone else who has been called a TERF.
Oh.
There isn't anybody else.
Yeah, because the only other lesbian I can think of is that the QI woman. But she's the other side of that.
I mean, there's nobody that's been targeted by Pink News.
What's her name, that QI woman?
I don't remember.
Took over from Stephen Fritz, Danish.
But I know, oh yes.
Yeah.
No.
But I think she's quite woke.
Yes,
she might not be, I can't remember.
She is, she is. And, well, anyway, it had to be me. And also, I knew the person that had given the interview. A young lesbian, lived out in the States, very vulnerable, a fantasist, who I'd spoken to at a request of a mutual friend, who said, look, this woman's coming over to do some panels at our university that I'm affiliated to, and she's really worried that we'll all hate her because she's American or whatever reasons. Have a quick word with her. And I did. It was foolish now looking back, but I spoke to her, and then she kept wanting to talk, so I just ignored her because I thought I don't have time for this. And she obviously took great offence, felt rejected. And when Vic Parsons, this so-called journalist, went sniffing around, having noticed this young lesbian was making the most outrageous accusations on Twitter about all of us that are called TERFs.
Well, like that you were physical? Sexual?
Oh, no, just that we were trying to groom her to get her to come over to the UK. And apparently I'd offered to find her a wife, to traffic her a bride in. Yeah, I know. And I'd run out of Moldovans that week. So, I mean, that was unlikely to happen.
Yeah.
And so, obviously, Parsons had gone sniffing around. Well, I now know because the woman in question turned against Pink News, as they all do in the end, and told me exactly what had happened. She contacted her. She said, will you do me an interview about this cult, the gender critical cult, and this particular evil monster, Julie Bindel? And then realised when it was legal that they couldn't possibly mention me in the piece because there were no receipts at all. There was no evidence whatsoever. All of the things I was accused of, albeit without them mentioning my name, were things I'd fought against all my adult life. Trafficking, sexual exploitation, grooming, harassment, anti-lesbianism, all of it. I've spent all my life, and this is what they do. It's classic gaslighting. You're accused of doing what you know you haven't done. You know, you want trans babies to be murdered. You're a homophobe. You're a bigot, and you're on the extreme right. Yeah. You're an anti-Semite. All of the things that, you know, we're the opposite of. Yeah. So
you're a massive lefty.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, I've never been on the hard left. I can't bear those people. Okay. Shoot me now, I don't care. Anyway, I'd die for a valiant cause. So this piece, I got up the next day, read it, and I was sitting at my kitchen table later that day thinking, I don't think I can take this anymore. I really don't. This is just harassment. It's so upsetting. They're accusing me of doing the most heinous things. And they think that just by not naming me, people won't know. And by then, Owen Jones had already retweeted the piece saying, this is a must-read by Vic Parsons.
Oh, and he knows.
And he knew who they were talking about. There were all kinds of tranosities, as I call them, absolute barking, trans-identified men who were tweeting saying, this is Julie Bindel, because look, this woman who's given the interview had already accused her of this online last week. So all of the things were stacking up. And I knew that it was absolutely, without question, actionable. And I'm just sitting, just like this, Andrew, talking to my partner, who's a lawyer. And she was saying, what are you going to do? Because she knows fine well that defamation is a huge risk. And then guess what happened? A fairy godmother appeared in my DMs in the shape of JK Rowling.
Shut up.
And said, we knew each other, but not very well at that stage. And she said, I think it's disgusting what Pink News have been doing to you. And I'm always on the free speech side of things, but this is defamation. It's a step too far. And if you want to sue them, I will fund the case.
No. Why didn't I know? Was that not like a publicly known thing?
It's never been public until very shortly, a few weeks ago, Joe and I were having a joke on Twitter, and we were having a joke about Pink News being in the soup, and angrily joking because it's vile.
Yeah.
And of course there are, if we are to believe the allegations, victims involved here. And she just said, I think it's about time, don't you, that we let Benji Boy know that I funded your case. And I said, yeah, that's great. And then we made a few other jokes about the only confidential bit of the case is what happened at the mediation. There's no NDA attached to any of the case. The documents are all out there publicly. But I can't possibly say what happened at the settlement agreement.
Gosh, I want to know now.
What's really, really nice, and this is completely unrelated, is that quite shortly afterwards, Kathleen Stock and I set up the Lesbian Project. It's really good, that, isn't it? Because having gone through 18 months of hellish litigation, I decided it would be lovely to do something just for lesbians. Yeah. You know, the opposite of what Pink News would like to see.
They seem to have an issue with lesbians, don't they? And
they do.
Always attacking JK Rowling as well. I mean, JK Rowling just loves gay people. Dumbledore was made gay after the fact, I think.
She's a human rights activist. She gives more to charities than anyone I can think of. The wealth that she distributes amongst those that need it. She's an excellent human being. But, see, they are nasty, spiteful, vicious misogynists. And, well, they got their comeuppance because we put them through 18 months of litigation. And my snout tells me, and of course you never know whether or not this is just made up because they want to impress you. But my person close to Pink News told me that senior members of staff, which would have included Cohen, kept saying, she can't go on like this forever. She must be spending... They must have remortgaged the house. I think her partner's parents died recently. Maybe they're spending that money. I mean, as if. They were insured, so they had no risk. But their insurers cannot have been pleased at the amount of money that they spent on this case, which was well over £500,000.
Whoa.
And that's all in public documentation.
And all the while, JK Rowling was
She
funding
was
it.
funding me.
What a legend.
Isn't it great?
Yeah, I absolutely love her. Were you a Harry Potter fan?
No, never read it. Never read a line.
I read it, like all 8 books in 5 languages because I was obsessed with it. And that was a way to learn, because the first book is sort of aimed at children and the last book is aimed at maybe young adults.
Right.
So it becomes more complicated language, and so I recommend anyone learning a language. That's one of the best ways. You start with the first Harry Potter, move up to the next Harry Potters. So I, my wife and I are just big Potter heads, although we'd never call ourselves that. Actually, it's the first time I've ever said that word. So, yes.
Well, it's down on the record now, and you can't edit yourself out saying that because I'll just tweet about it.
He's a Potterhead. Telling J.K. Rowling my hero. He says he's a Potterhead. What a loser.
No, I mean, it just wasn't my thing. And anyway, by the time the books came out, I was well past childhood, and why would I read children's books? But lots of my adult friends did.
My dad did. So there you go. Yeah. Is there a need for sort of a Pink News that isn't anti-gay? Is a sort of a gay newsy kind of thing?
Well, we talk about gay. Well, we used to talk about the gay press, and when I came out in the 1970s, there was gay news, and there were various, 1 or 2 gay-related publications that were really important because there was nothing in the mainstream press. We had no legislation to protect from being sacked from our jobs. There was no way that we could meet other lesbians or gay men unless we went upstairs in a back room of a pub where we could be kicked out ceremoniously at any time the landlord fancied it. And so it was an invaluable part of gay culture, and gay culture at that time was recognisable by the fight for equality and the fight for protective legislation. I don't believe in a gay community. Certainly don't believe in an LGBT community, because we're all so different. We don't vote with our sexuality. It's ridiculous to suggest that we are a community. But at the time that we were fighting for this legislation that we urgently needed, whether it's about the right to raise, adopt or foster our own children in same-sex couples, or not be kicked out of our flats, our houses, our families, our jobs, then that's when we were a community. And that's when the gay media was really relevant. And then it became much more about lifestyle. And in the 90s, it was very porn-heavy with just escort ads and
leather
porn images and S&M stuff, and didn't relate to the vast majority of lesbians at all. And lesbians had stuff about, how to raise your 7 cats and endure a 15-year breakup. So, all of it was just not really that interesting at all. And I question whether we need anything like Pink News, because surely what we need are ways in which not only can we make contact with each other online, especially from other countries and different groups of women that we might not meet face to face, but we also need a way to get together physically occasionally, organise things, plan things, resist the trans activist misogyny, which is why we set up the Lesbian Project, because there was nothing like that. And in fact, legally, in many countries, and we're testing this law now in the UK at the Supreme Court, we're not even sure whether legally we can meet as women only and exclude men that say they're lesbians. So I don't think we need a gay press, and we certainly don't need Pink News. I think we just need to be able to access media that we have contributed to. But no, I don't see why we should have ghettoised media in that way at all.
I suppose part of what you're saying is when a community is under attack, you feel more of a community. When a group of people are under attack, I see that maybe in the Jewish section as well. For years when I was growing up, I felt incredibly different to most Jewish people I knew. We had all different, like any community, I don't relate to these people. And suddenly, since October 7th, there's suddenly, I walk down the street in North London, people come over and we're all sort of linked in some way. Right. And that's when it feels like there's a need. So it sounds like that. Definitely.
And Kathleen and I do a weekly podcast for the Lesbian Project. And we've got, a good healthy number of subscribers, some of which are men and not the pervy sorts, some of which are heterosexuals, and many lesbians who are in different countries around the world who want to be connected. For an hour every week, you can have a laugh about different lesbian-related themes, and you can talk seriously about whatever legal case there is. So lesbian culture is great, but I don't think that we need, for example, a lesbian press, because what on earth would it report on every week or every day?
Just you two.
Yeah, I mean, we think we're hot news, but I don't think we.
You know what? You'd end up talking about trans a lot, and that would then be like,
stop it, yeah. And we just don't need PinkNews, and I wish it the very worst. I really do. It's done an incredible amount of harm, and it has led the way. If you look at Cohen, when he was the first .com millionaire, and he was a teenage millionaire.
Oh, I read something on that. Yes.
Right, and then he went on to make a lot of money from porn sites. And he then set up PinkNews, and I first actually met him at an industry event back in 2012, 13 maybe. And at that time, I was writing a book on lesbian and gay culture in the UK, and I needed every single publication that lesbians and gays might read to include a survey that I had written to see if I could get some data for my book. So I asked Ben at this event. We sat next to each other and we got on okay. I mean, he's a bit of a muppet, but we got on fine. And he said he would publish the survey if I would write an article for the site explaining why I'm writing the book, what the themes are. And at that time, the mainstream media had started to pander to trans activism and were giving them columns. The Guardian, the New Statesman, all these trans activists that mainly couldn't write were suddenly writing a lot. And it was at the time that a bloke called Paris Lees, a massive trans activist, was running something called Transmedia Watch. And they were going around The Sun, The Mail, The Mirror, BBC Channel 4, and dictating to them how they should report on trans issues. How as soon as a trans person dies, it's because of transphobia, that you have to use their preferred pronouns. All of this kind of benevolent bullying that they did. And I've spoken to editors since about them getting a training course from Transmedia Watch, and they've all admitted they were bullied into it. And it's easy, I've been bullied. And I was bullied directly by Paris Lees to capitulate to him at one stage, never again. And Ben said to me, I'm going to publish your piece and the survey. It's great. Thank you for sending it in. We love it. And then he emailed me and said, I'm really sorry. Paris Lees has told me I can't publish it. At that time, he was working with PinkNews.
Wow.
And was being a real bully against any feminists that spoke out. And this was in the quite early days.
And so were you speaking out against any kind of the trans stuff?
No, not mentioned. My book was about lesbian and gay culture in the UK. Where are we today, kind of thing.
Was it because you'd said things not to do with the book?
It's because since 2004 I've been targeted by these wazzocks because I wrote...
Because of gender views?
Yeah, because of my views on transsexuality, as I referred to it at the time, being absolutely bonkers and harmful. And so Paris Lees had so much influence over Cohen that he pulled the piece. And I emailed Cohen and said, you fucking coward.
Yeah.
And do you know what? I think that's probably why he doesn't like me very much.
Well, everyone's got a reason why they don't like Julie Bindel. I mean, we've all got them,
I like a range.
You refused to take up, Taekwondo or something to fight people? That was one of them?
Yeah, to fight off. Yeah. And I don't like people eating crisps on trains.
I love Peter Boghossian, though. I love you both. I like being in the middle and winding you both up against each other, because that's how it should be, like a family argument. Speaking of family, so James Dreyfus, who's your pretend husband on Twitter, I mean,
What do you mean pretend?
I don't know.
Has he left me again?
When I first saw it, there was a split second, because I wasn't familiar with this joke from the beginning. I was like, oh, they're married. That's interesting. Because no, you idiot. That can't work. That doesn't make sense. But he's wonderful, isn't he? Wonderful.
Yes, he is. I love James very much, and we developed this joke. I'm not sure how it started, that we had been married. We've got 3 children. I think we call them Aldi, Asda, and Lidl, and we have since divorced acrimoniously.
Are you around the same age? Would that work?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're both in our 60s, so it would work. And I think, James, sorry if you're not, darling, I think you are. Anyway, it would have worked. And lots of people took it seriously. And of course, James, part of the reason why I love him is he's always on that line of just about to go too far, which is where I am.
Sure.
And so we started joking about how rubbish I am in the bedroom and the kitchen.
Yeah.
Although some people might actually comment under this video and say both of those are true.
Yeah.
But
I happen to know her. Yeah.
That's right.
You've changed your hair since Gimme Gimme Gimme, though, haven't you? It was bright orange at the time.
It's true. But anyway, so we do have a joke about that. And I think that the relationship between lesbians and gay men that are standing up against this mad trans ideology, the misogynistic wing of it, we've become great friends. And it's a nice feeling, because we don't have very much in common, lesbians and gay men. And that doesn't mean there has to be hostility or antagonism at all. But we really don't.
You're almost opposites, aren't you?
Yeah, we really don't. But we will get together when there's a good reason to. And what happens when that time comes is that many of us become friends and we stay friends. And that's really nice.
This is something I've been, no matter what the topic is on this podcast, I've been finding more and more people who used to maybe not be together or even be opposed. So maybe gay men and lesbians, or maybe gay people and straight people, maybe religious people and atheists. Suddenly we're all sort of aligned because there seems to be a bigger fight, which seems to be what pro-West and anti-West. The woke being trying to bring down Western values of truth and things like that. And the rest of us going, oh, shut up. And now I don't care that I'm sitting with a devout Christian who maybe 20 years ago would have been mortal enemies and that kind of thing. What together?
Yeah, I think we've been united by queers for Hamas, really. I think, there's no greater example.
Perfect example.
It's great. And there's a parody account, Dame Katie Denise, who is very popular on Twitter. And Dame Katie Denise, of course, some of us know who Dame Katie Denise is in real life, and we will never speak. But Dame Katie advocates for trans animals, so rodents that are misgendered. And also she runs a great campaign for chairs for trans, because the photographs that Dame Katie finds on whichever dating sites she's on often features trans women sitting on the floor, tilting the head to one side with the legs out and showing the shapely ankle. So Dame Katie's brilliant. And there are actually people... and the face of Dame Katie, of the parody account, is Jack Duckworth from Coronation Street, for those that know who that character is. And some people take it seriously, and some people actually think Dame Katie Denise is a real person.
Wow, because that shows how mad a lot of other real people are.
Yes, because that's how mad. The gay men know, the lesbians know, but those that are invested in this lunacy, for them, it's beyond satire, because actually Dame Katie's only reflecting what is seen in real life. And that's where we are right now. But Dame Katie does a great line in Queers for Hamas. So if you want to look her up,
she makes like jokes about
as Dame Katie, as a trans woman, a proud trans woman with an X.
Fucking hell, that is the ultimate. You're right. That's the ultimate example of. It doesn't matter if you're gay or straight. It doesn't matter if you're this or that. It's these people want to bring down Western values, which we quite like.
Completely, and are pretending to themselves perhaps that this is not about a caliphate, that this is not about political Islam, that this is only about what they would refer to as the genocide and nothing else features in their narrow worldview.
It's insane. And you know what? That was actually my next point. That I saw Pink News celebrating Muslim pride, and I was looking at this a few weeks ago. Actually, it's also written extensively about homosexuality in the Muslim world, and admitted it can be difficult to be openly gay or lesbian in predominantly Islamic countries.
It can be difficult.
But this is a quote from them. But in the West, there are even a few gay imams. This is Pink News.
Pink News has actually. This is actual Pink News,
That's
not
Pink News.
Dame Katie saying that Pink News has said this.
That's Pink News. Yeah, I've quoted them. Difficult to be openly difficult. It can be difficult to be openly gay or lesbian in predominantly Islamic countries, but in the West there are even a few gay imams. So it's all right.
Right.
For people thrown off buildings.
Yeah, I mean they could throw themselves off buildings just to show that they've got bodily autonomy. This is absolute bonkers, and yes, of course. These arguments will be co-opted by racists. I mean, real racists.
Sure.
But we know the situation. We know it from those ex-Muslim gays and lesbians that have left Jordan, Iran, elsewhere in the Middle East,
Pakistan,
and that they have come to the West to fight for the liberation of the people in their country that can't leave. They know that this is terrible. They know that if you do not live under democracy, that you can't have human and legal rights if you're not a man leading the charge. And yet they pretend to themselves that all things are equal. And this drives me mad.
Yeah, all cultures are equal, diversity is our strength, all the different cultures together. I can't believe it. And it must frustrate you because it's done often, not always, but in the name of some sort of gayness or gay adjacent LGBTQ thing. I saw Jeff Goldblum asked a question on RuPaul. Did you see this? Good on Jeff, I think, because he was asking, while he was on this RuPaul program, somebody had dressed up in a whole sort of Islamic thing, and he said, well, let's ask, is there something in this religion that is anti-homosexuality and anti-woman? Does that complicate the issue? I'm just raising it and thinking out loud and maybe being stupid. He had to be careful. He had to cover himself like that. Everyone went fucking mental. Pink News ran an article about how everyone was criticising and mentioned that loads of queers are being killed in America. So Jeff Goldblum was out for saying that.
Who are the loads of queers that are being killed in America?
Well, the last I saw was because I was talking to Julie Hartley-Brewer yesterday. And she had that infamous moment where Owen Jones walked off when they were debating.
I remember when they were doing the paper review.
But it turned out it was a queer person or a gay person, I don't know which one, and they are different, of course, those things, who was the
Queers
terrorist.
are usually straight men with a kink, so...
Yeah, it does seem to be the case. I suppose there are some gay people who would say they're queer. But
yes, of course there are.
The Eurovision ones were straight, though.
Well, yes, and there's lots of pressure on young women, particularly, to call themselves queer, because that takes the woman bit out of it. Because we've always said that being a lesbian is specific to being a woman, because we get the sexism, but turbocharged. But it's utterly ludicrous to suggest that all things are relative and that there's no difference being openly gay, which in fact you can't be unless you are just protected by armed guards 24 hours a day, and the West. And I wrote a few years ago about a horrific murder of a young gay man called Matthew Shepard. The murder of Matthew Shepard in the US was always seen, is still seen, as an example of a homophobic murder of the most extreme and vicious kind. And it led to changes in the law and the introduction of hate crime laws, which I really disapprove of. And also the likes of Ellen DeGeneres speaking out publicly in huge public rallies about the hatred in our midst and homophobia and hatred of gay people, and lots of NGOs, of charities set up immediately afterwards, were very well funded in Matthew Shepard's name. Now, the young men that murdered Matthew Shepard were themselves being sexually exploited, pimped out, and abused by the same men that were abusing Matthew Shepard. They were very, very disturbed. They were themselves, one was bisexual, one was gay. And this was not the easy, straightforward, neat narrative of a homophobic murder by rednecks that people would have liked it to be. Why would you need to do that when a young man has been murdered so viciously and cruelly? Why do you have to ascribe it to a cause and fit it, do the square peg and round hole thing? And I think that's what happens constantly, always now, that this idea that trans women of colour are being murdered in their droves in Brazil because of the things that I and JK Rowling say, when in fact it's prostituted young men who are in transvestite gear that are selling sex to very violent, dangerous punters, as punters often are.
Yeah.
And it's because of prostitution.
Yeah.
And those violent men that they are being murdered, not because they are trans women of colour.
And Brazil itself. I mean,
And Brazil is
a dangerous place to walk around. So
with per capita, the highest number of murders, certainly in South America, but most of the world. So they're all terrible tragedies. But I will not just go along with the reasoning ascribed to it so that you can point the finger at a problem that doesn't exist or has been hugely exaggerated. And I think often there's a lot of money behind these organisations that will say queers are being killed in their droves in America, therefore we can't look at what Hamas is doing, or we can't look at what is happening under Islamic rule for gays and lesbians there. It's nonsense.
Move there if you think that. If you think it's, move to those places if you think it's fine over there.
Exactly. And if you're talking about, for example, the full face veil as a choice, which some women that dare to call themselves feminists do, and say even that it's a symbol of fuck you to the West and it's a symbol of agency, why don't they, because they're usually white female academics, why don't they just go to a village square in Pakistan, take their full face veil off and see what happens to them?
Yeah.
Then they'll see how much of a choice it is.
Yeah, and not to mention that if it is a symbol of sort of anti-West, well, fuck off then. This is the West. I don't go to another country and be anti them. I'm not in the middle of Saudi Arabia.
And don't put them on your children.
Yeah, well,
because they are not choosing. Because they are not the SOAS-going wokeists that think that it's oh so clever to walk around shouting about bigotry in the West towards... Anyway.
A lot of commentators, such as Elon Musk and our friend Matt Goodwin, have been saying that the mainstream media did not cover the grooming gangs. Is that true?
No, it's not true. The mainstream media did cover the grooming gangs, but some of the quality of the reporting was not as it should be. And many of them did take some time to get up to scratch with it. And I remember going in 2006 to the editor of The Guardian, to Catherine Viner, when she was features editor. Or she may have been editor of the Weekend magazine, that I wrote for a lot. I was writing across The Guardian at that time, before I was blacklisted and frozen out because of the usual. And I said, I found this story. I've been talking to police officers and parents up in Lancashire, and there are these gangs of men that are abusing girls and they're selling them to their mates, they're pimping them. And the MO is the same. The MO is that they get lots of attention from the younger, nice-looking men, and many of them, but not all, are Pakistani Muslim. In these former mill towns, that was the demographic, particularly of the young men that were involved in criminal activity, so it made sense. And then they would be introduced to older men with cars and with vodka and with hash. And then next thing they'd be down the takeaways with the even older men, the so-called elders of the community, who'd then pimp them out and put them in flats and have them raped for money several times a day. And Viner said, we'd be called racist though, wouldn't we? And I tried to explain, well, if we were, then that would be by people who are idiots. I'm a feminist. I've been writing about this ever since I became a campaigner in my teens against child abuse in all its forms.
So you had it said to you. I mean, that's quite. That's what people are alleging happened. You had experience of that.
She said to me, we'd be called racist.
So it was a no.
Oh, I wasn't commissioned. And I remember the conversation extremely well. She said, but you're saying that these are largely Pakistani Muslims. And I said, but they are, because they're in these towns where the criminal gangs of Pakistani Muslim young men, and there may be reasons why they were unemployed, but that's not for me to say, were peddling heroin before and it became too hot to handle, so they're now peddling girls and having some sexual freebies on the side. So I thought, okay, and I was investigating this disappearance of a girl called Charlene Downs, hadn't been seen since 2004, and I went to the Sunday Times magazine and they took it. And people were saying, oh gosh, congratulations, you got your first piece in the Sunday Times magazine. And I was saying, well, I offered it to The Guardian. They wanted it. And then actually 2 years later, after the trial of two men that were accused of murdering Charlene Downs, this was 2008, the trial collapsed because the police had used kind of Rachel Nickell style tactics of getting that they were bugged. These men had bugs all over the house and their cars, and they couldn't really hear what they were saying, and they pretty much leapt to conclusions about these two men who had been abusing Charlene Downs, but who were acquitted of murder because there was no evidence. I went to that trial, and Viner then took a piece from me about what led up to the murder and the endemic child abuse in Blackpool and the gang-related activity. Because by then, she recognised this was not a racist narrative. And of course, it had been tried and tested at the Sunday Times, and I got a really good reception from that piece. So they're wrong that the mainstream media didn't cover it. The accusations that some were frightened in the media to cover it because they saw it as a bit unsavoury. They just wanted to do the cuddly bits of child abuse. The local magistrate that had been raping his own daughter, that was fine as long as he'd been convicted. But they didn't want to look at this particularly. But now we're awash with people that only want to look at the race and ethnicity. They don't want to look at the child abuse. They don't want to look at the fact that the police have never given a damn about girls being targeted by gangs outside care homes, which has been going on since way before the 1990s, even when I first came across
white gangs.
Yeah, white gangs, white care home workers, pimps coming to pick them up in taxis. These people that are now claiming that, where are the feminists? Where are all the feminists? Well, we've been there all along, actually, looking at the fact that the police fail victims of child sexual abuse. Almost always.
Regardless of ethnicity.
Regardless of that. But there is something specific to say, and I have always maintained this, about the ethnicity of these men, of the Pakistani Muslim grooming gang members, because it did lead to the police not caring about being called racist. That's a myth. Why should the police care about being seen as racist? They cared about having to mop up after a race riot. They cared not about the girls at all, because they were just seen as slags. Because any of these girls that have sex with older men, especially if it's a man outside of your own neighbourhood, then they're just worthless. So that's the story.
It's tragic. It is tragic. It's horrible. And I agree with you. I've tried to bring this up a few times on the podcast, talking to people, but I sort of get accused of whataboutery. There have been gangs of white people as well. And we have to be very careful because I keep hearing different statistics around, yes, but pro rata, it's much more Muslim gangs.
But it's ridiculous. The whataboutery is ridiculous because, of course, the majority of child abusers are white because we live in a country where the majority of people are white.
We have to see what the pro rata situation is then.
Of course, but the pro rata situation is that there've always been gangs of men, the Maltese in the 60s running prostitution, for example, men who were of African Caribbean descent in the 70s in West London. There've always been groups of men that you can define by their ethnicity, in particular crime waves or types, or running particular businesses related to sexual abuse. So it's never irrelevant. We should collect the data about who's being victimised and who is perpetrating, which is why we shouldn't write out the numbers of Muslim girls and Sikh girls and black girls that have also been sexually abused and targeted by these men. So the whataboutery drives me mad. And when academics commissioned by the Home Office come up with some absolute Houdini-like twist to show that ethnicity isn't a factor in these particular dynamics. That's ridiculous. The girls were told by the men, the Pakistani men, or the Middle Eastern men, because of course Pakistani became a generic term to label any brown-skinned man working in the takeaways. These girls were told by these men, your parents disapprove of this relationship because they're racist. And of course, the racial slurring of these girls, calling them white slags and white bitches, was part of the way that these men would knock them down and make them feel completely isolated from themselves and their families. So it's always been relevant. But this idea that all of a sudden these knights in shining armour screaming, where were the feminists, have cared about this issue, and they're just there stepping in to mop up the mess made by feminists, is hypocritical and enraging in the extreme.
I was going to ask you, because we were going to talk a few weeks ago, and I got this question just because Elon Musk had just called Jess Phillips, and I don't want to say the word too many times because of YouTube, but our genocide apologist. And at that time, I was thinking, gosh, that's probably not right, is it, for someone to say that? But I don't think she, she's in a very difficult position. I don't think she's done the right things most of the time, in my opinion. But then I noticed that she's called other people exactly that quite a lot of times. So now I don't know where to stand with that. What do you think?
You mean Jess Phillips has called other people genocide apologists?
Yeah, she's used those exact words, I think. I think she said it to George Galloway, among other people.
I don't know. I mean, I really haven't ever seen or heard her say anything of that nature. Politicians are a nightmare. You will not get one of them saying what they really think. They will toe the party line. Some of them on the back benches will stand up and stand out. But I think targeting Jess Phillips when she's far from perfect, but she's done more to speak out against male violence towards women and girls, I think is a real cheek, actually. There are so many that, I mean, my God, some of the young MPs, I don't remember their names right now, but those that have signed up to the worst of gender ideology, the worst of cultural relativism, and I think that they would probably fit that bill.
I think many of us feel let down by her, what is perceived as a sort of kowtowing to Islam and for the vote, to buy the sort of Islamic vote. And
everyone kowtows to their voter, everyone. But I really don't see why it was acceptable to put a target on her back in that way when she has done more than any other member of parliament that I know of directly to challenge men's violence towards women and girls. But I don't know the details of anything to do with her calling others genocidal. I mean, quite frankly, I think George Galloway probably fits that bill perfectly well.
Yeah, for other reasons, I think quite possibly so. Yeah, it didn't sit well with me. The Jess Phillips, I know she's on a different, maybe ideological team to me. I don't know what, especially around Islam. And is she Birmingham? Is that her thing?
Yes. I mean, I honestly voted for what I saw, and I voted for the least bad party at the time. So I voted Labour, and I have been very vocal in my disgust at the Labour Party. Not just since the election. I mean, they've clearly messed up majorly, even more than any of us could have imagined. But for years before this, I've been writing about the misogyny on the left, the lunacy in the Labour Party, the failure to do the right thing.
Anti-Semitism.
Oh, all of it. I mean, I lost friends over the Jeremy Corbyn thing.
They're the only ones alongside with the BNP as the only, was it neutrally adjudicated? What was it? Did you know what I mean? They were considered by a neutral or an impartial judgment to be systemically racist. And the only time that's happened in history was the BNP.
Yeah, I mean, I really detest Corbyn's policies, and the man himself, he used to be a decent constituency MP in the next borough along to me. Terrible leader. Awful anti-Semitism in the party under him. And I want an NHS, though. I want decent public education. I want to build public services up again so that people who need to access them can do that. And that's how, I am by definition on the left.
Yeah.
But I have always railed against the hard left. And I've been a very, very vocal critic of the Labour Party, whilst not wanting to be hypocritical and pretending that I'm not voting for them.
I think that's a good.
So I
good
just
place
take I just take the flak.
I respect that. I think that's good. I've got one more question for you, but where can people find that podcast and work you're doing at the moment?
You can find the Lesbian Project podcast on our Substack, and I think it's on the usual platforms, Apple and the like. And I've got a book coming out. That's very exciting. It's about lesbians. Did I mention I'm a lesbian? Yeah, so that's coming out in April.
Yeah.
And I'm also making a podcast series about a missing woman from 1973.
Wow.
So it's all go, Andrew. All go.
It's all happening. We'll have some of those links below. Tell me who's a heretic you admire.
Oh, I'd forgotten about this. Oh, I'll tell you what. Martina Navratilova.
Oh.
Speaking of lesbians, so many senior, well-known, iconic sports people, men and women, have refused to stand up for women-only sports, have refused to stand up for the girls trying to get into elite sports and school sports, you name it, amateur sports, without having these hulking great blokes threatening to bash their brains out by competing against them, or just making it obvious that girls are not allowed to have anything for themselves. So Martina has spoken out at great cost, and she's brilliant fun. She's been a lesbian and gay ally all of her adult life and sporting life, and she is one of my heroes.
Oh, that's a wonderful heretic. People, please go get Julie's podcast with Kathleen. Kathleen Stock's cool, isn't she? She's like cool.
She's cool.
She's really cool.
Yeah.
Not, I mean, you are as well.
No, I'm not cool.
You're not cool.
Kathleen's cool.
You're-
But she's,
When Helen Joyce was here, she might not like me saying this, but she was like going on and on, like, Kathleen Stock's so cool. I can't believe. I wish I was cool like Kathleen Stock. And I thought, I wish I was as well.
well, Helen's pretty cool.
Yeah, well, there
I
you go.
love Helen.
Yeah, she's quite cool. You're not.
I'm not cool. I haven't got an ounce of cool. I've never had an ounce of cool.
Which in itself is
It's cool.
pretty damn cool. People, hit the like button. Go get Julie's podcast. Hit the like button. Keep watching this channel.